Hey GP learners, do you understand pensions? I don't, and for that reason I've got some expert people here to talk to us about pensions. Our current crisis is an absolute nightmare for many people, and in this episode I guarantee you're going to learn something about them. Shall we begin? If this is the first time we're meeting, I'm Dr Gandalf of eGP Learning, where I look at supporting you with technology-enhanced primary care and learning. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at pensions, specifically the NHS pension, and we're going to try and answer some of those complicated questions that some of you may have had. I'm being privileged to be joined by Rachael Hall, who's effectively the NHS pensions accountant. That's actually her Twitter handle. Nicholas Grundy, who's head of the GP survival movement as well as a pensions lead, and pretty much if he doesn't know it, it doesn't exist. And Krishan Aggarwal, who's also the former GPC lead for pensions, again, probably knows just as much as Nicholas, if not more. All three of these amazing people are going to be telling us about pensions and hopefully help you guys navigate what you need to do to sort this whole mess out for yourself. As always, if you've got any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down below, or you can contact me at drgandalf52 or at eGP Learning. As always, we're on the eGP Learning platform on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and the podcasting platforms as ever. Make sure you click subscribe to get all of our future content first and foremost. And as always, we're here to try and help save you and your patients time by tech enhancing your primary care and learning. Shall we begin? Hi GP learners. So today we're privileged to be joined by some esteemed guests and knowledgeable people who definitely know a lot more about pensions than I do, as you're probably going to find out throughout this podcast and stuff. So we've got Rachael Hall, Nick Grundy and Krishan Aggarwal. Hi guys, you got all okay?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because they probably do it far better than I ever would. So I'm going to go in order on what I've got on screen. So Rachael, do you mind just briefly introducing yourself?
Yes, Rachael Hall, NHS pension specialist and independent financial advisor. I have been advising doctors now for what seems like centuries on this archaic tax system. And that's why I'm here today. So thank you for inviting me along.
No problem. And then next we've got Nick.
I'm Nick Grundy. I'm a GP partner in South West London, and I'm also chair of GP Survival. So I'm here mostly because of that. So I've been running a campaign for the last couple of years looking at how pensions contributions are managed when they leave doctors and employers and go through Capita and NHS England and the problems that GPs have getting hold of that pension information as a result.
Okay. And just so a lot of our GP learners know as well, I'm also the treasurer of GP Survival. So Nick and I have been working together on this. However, he is far more knowledgeable in this area than I am. And lastly, we've got Krishan. How are we doing?
Well, thank you. My name is Krishan Aggarwal. I'm a portfolio GP based in London, and I've had a great interest in pensions for quite some time. And I'm here as myself today, but one of my roles is within the BMA, where I meet Capita and PCSE on a regular basis.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So pensions is a pretty hot topic at the moment. There's been loads in the news about it. It's kind of come to the forefront of pretty much everything that GPs are doing now that indemnity seems to have been sorted and that kind of stuff. And in particular, there's been a few changes and stuff that have happened actually within the past week or so as well. So talk about hot topic. But I guess what I would like to know, because as I said, I know very little about pensions, which is really, really bad. I guess some of the terms, first of all. So, it's a defined benefit scheme. What exactly is that? Should we go to Nick, first of all, or Rachael? Whoever wants to go.
I can take it. Yes, there are two different types of pension schemes. And to be a bit jargony, we've got a defined benefit and a defined contribution. Now, the NHS pension scheme is defined benefit. So essentially what that means is that you can define your benefits when you get to retirement, i.e. we can calculate what the pension income might be in the future. Okay, a defined contribution scheme is like a stocks and shares pension. So it will have a fund, it's a pot of cash, and you will pay into it. Now, the NHS pension scheme has an underpin by the government, and obviously we have lots of different of it, but basically the reason why it is the best scheme out of the two is because it pays you a guaranteed income for life, and it's not subject to stock market falls. You buy much greater benefits with a defined benefit scheme because you get things like dependents, pensions, ill health retirement pensions. And that's why when we come to talk about the annual allowance, it has a different annualised value to a defined contribution scheme. I'll let Nick now translate that into layman's terms.
No, I think that was spot on. I mean, I think talking to trainees, so people in the VTS scheme, a lot of them don't know, and a lot of people outside that don't know that it's a defined benefit scheme. So I've had people say, well, I seem to contributed too much to my pension 3 or 4 years ago, but that's good, right? Because it'll help my pension. And the answer is no. If you've paid too much in contributions, that's your money and you should get it back. It doesn't benefit your pension one bit, which is, as Rachel says, actually a good thing, because your income is guaranteed and you don't have to worry about what the investment's doing. But I think just that on that basic point, it's not something that's perhaps taught as well as it should be on VTS schemes, because it's not something I had a particular awareness of before starting this work.
Mm. And I guess with some of those benefits, you mentioned a couple there, Rachel, about dependents pensions, but also the kind of illness cover as such. And I know that particularly NHS pension has this death in service benefit, which is often lauded as one of its big, benefits itself. Krishan, you might know a little bit more about the definitions of the death in service kind of benefit. And I know that there's been some recent cases of it being a bit of an issue as well. Could you go through that, if that's right?
So the death in service essentially means that if you were to die whilst in service, I'll define that in a moment, you're entitled to a lump sum payout to your family members. Now, if you were, for example, a partner and you were in contract, then that death in service is continuous. Similarly, if you were salaried, whether it be 1 day a week or full-time, your contract is continuous and therefore the death in service is continuous. The difficulty arises when we look at locums. So for example, if I were to locum on a Monday, then I'm not locuming until a Wednesday. If I were to die on the Tuesday, or at that moment in time, I'm not in service, and therefore I'm not eligible for death in service. What I am eligible for is something called death in benefit. And the only difference between death in service and death in benefit is the size of the lump sum. Now, this is a very unfair regulation. So my role within the BMA, we have raised this, and it's currently sitting in the High Court. So we are waiting to hear the outcome of that decision. Okay.
So definitely worth being aware of in terms of what your kind of work role is. Nick, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, I was just saying, I think, Rachel, you may know more about the details, but I think that the difference is pretty significant in terms of the lump sum that you get, isn't it? Because I think it's twice your annual earnings if you're in service. Do locums still get sorry, go ahead.
3 times.
3 times, sorry, right. And it's twice the accrued pension if you're not in service, is that right?
It's twice your accrued pension, yes, that's right. So it's death after service and it's death in service. In service is based upon pensionable income or pensionable profits, and death after service is based upon the accrued pension, or what would alternatively be a T1 ill health retirement pension.
And those are also a lot better if you're in service, aren't they? The Tier 1 and Tier 2 ill health retirement.
Correct, yes, that's right.
Those are often bits, as I understand, that you can't replace in the open market, because actually with the death lump sum, you can pay for life insurance that would pay even larger.
Oh yeah,
but
that's correct.
Survivor's pension and dependents pension, are they the bits that where really the scheme is much better than anything else you can get, is that right?
Yes. So basically, it's very, very difficult to completely replicate the death benefits that the NHS pension scheme provide. So one of the things that we can do is, if somebody dies, you can take out a life cover. That's totally fine. Yeah. If you think about the other alternative insurances that are available on the open market, if you've already got pre-existing health conditions, medical conditions, the chances are, if you do try to insure privately, that you could have a declined policy, and it also might be that they apply an exclusion, as you will all understand. If you are a member of the NHS pension scheme, none of that will actually count, so it won't matter. So that you've got to obviously separate private insurances from the insurance and the payouts that you will get from being a member, an active member from the NHS pension scheme. There's also a terminal illness benefit attached to an NHS pension. So essentially what that means is that if your life expectancy is less than 12 months, it does have to be authorised by the scheme, obviously. They may pay out to you your like a big life assurance lump sum, because obviously you will not be alive as many years to receive that pension income. So there are a lot of attractive death benefits and associated things like ill health retirement pension. Now, if you wanted to replicate ill health retirement pension on the open market, you don't get very far with that, because the only thing that you can do is take out insurance policies that will have a set term. So they will generally end at retirement, or they might pay you an income. So really, whilst you can insure against an element of these pension benefits, they're generally much better than what you can ever insure for privately.
Okay, so I guess just to summarise then, in terms of the extra benefits, it's effectively, if you're going to die, which the reality in life is, the only certainties in life is death and taxes. Hey, that's what we're talking about. Is that you get considerably better benefits through the NHS pension, for death in service, as well as dependents and that kind of stuff.
Well, death in service, you can actually, I mean, the thing is, with private insurance, you can set your own level of a life assurance payout. So if you want £1 million payout with the life assurance, you can set that up as long as you pay those premiums. Whereas a death in service benefit with the pension scheme will only give you a proportion of like a set level of income, if you like. So that's only twice your pensionable pay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess moving on to the next kind of area that's worth defining. I know there's terms like annual allowance and lifetime allowance.
Mm-hmm.
Please educate me. What on earth do they mean? I'm confused already. So
there are two different types of taxation. So there is one where you are entitled to a certain amount of tax relief each year when you're contributing to a pension. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is called the annual allowance. The annual allowance is the amount of tax relief that you can receive. So if you're in a defined contribution scheme, then the amount of tax relief that you're entitled to is 100% of your earned income or UK relevant earnings. And that is then subject to a cap, which is the £40,000 annual allowance. The NHS pension scheme does not work like that at all. Okay. So this is where it becomes really complicated, because you've got these death benefits. It's you are perceived to have a value of 16 times what money can buy. Okay, so this is where you get the 16 times multiplier. Now, if anybody's in the 1995 section of the scheme, you've got the 16 times multiplier plus the lump sum to add to that. So I'm not going to go through the calculation, because it's just, you won't get your head around it when I start to speak how you do it.
Okay.
But that's what the annual allowance is. You could go back 3 years, you carry forward unused allowances from those 3 years to offset against your £40,000 annual allowance limit. Now, over the last sort of 10 years, let's just say, we've seen the annual allowance change quite dramatically. Now, we saw in 2016-17 the tapering introduced, which means that not everybody will be entitled to this £40,000 allowance. And yet another layer of complexity will be that they will then have to essentially calculate a reduced annual allowance. And this is where they're going to need advice and a good agreement.
Okay, Nick, I think you wanted to come in on that, didn't you? And then Krishan after that.
Sure. So I was to say that on the annual allowance, I think that from the point of view of me, sat here as GP partner, if I run a defined contribution scheme, then it's easy, because I know that if I put more than 40,000 into a pension in a year, then I'm at risk of taxation. And you can plan for that, and you know it's happening, and
Yeah.
people don't. And similarly, in the defined contribution scheme, I think if you are tapered, so if your income is high and you're in that situation, you can just elect to put less into the pension, so you avoid the taxation on that money. The problem that we have as GPs is that you're assessed, as Rachel says, on this impenetrable this pension input amount. And what they do is they look at your existing pension accrual and they multiply it by, that, I think it was 16, and they add CPI. And then you're assessed on that notional growth, that sort of imaginary figure that really is plucked from the air. And I've tried to calculate my own one, even with retrospective. I just don't know how to get to those figures. To give you a personal example, when I first moved from BTS as a partnership, doing 9 sessions, so the big income jump, and my deemed pension growth, the amount on which I was notionally taxed by the allowance for the first year, was about 1.5 times my gross annual income. It was that level.
Wow.
I assumed it was a mistake, but that was just because they used this mechanism of growth where the increase in my income was multiplied by 16 and then uplifted. So these numbers just don't make sense, even to me when I've read about it.
Okay, Krishan?
I think the point that members need to understand is that the growth, £40,000 doesn't mean that your pension has grown by that, because of the factors that Rachel and Nick have mentioned. So even a small change in your income can actually lead to a large growth in your pension. And once you hit that 40,000, you're eligible to pay HMRC taxes.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulties that we have is that because of other issues such as character, etc., many people's pension records are not up to date, and therefore their liabilities may not become clear until much later.
Mm-hmm.
The second issue is that if your income rises above £110,000, and that's not just from your GP income, this can be all incomes, whether you've got income from rental properties, etc. Your growth is then added, and if that growth is greater than 40, you have what's called your 110, your 150, you start losing parts of that 40,000. So every pound you are over, you start losing it. And very quickly, your 40,000 can become very small. And as a result, you're more likely to hit the taper, the tax. And the whole purpose of this is to essentially take away that relief, that tax relief that you've already received on 40%. And unfortunately, this is tax on income you've never had. So that's why it's so unfair. And that's why the BMA are trying to have a campaign to scrap the taper.
Okay, so we've covered what effectively annual allowance is, and that kind of feeds into the lifetime allowance, which is also that concept of the multiplier. Does that sound about right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So not only do you pay tax while you're contributing to the pension scheme, you also pay tax when you decide to draw your pension. Or some of you might pay tax. Depends what level of pot you've built up. So the way that a defined benefit pension scheme is valued for the purposes of the lifetime allowance is we multiply the pension by 20 and then we add on a lump sum. Okay, so that's technically correct. Or you can, if you're in the 995 section, just multiply it by 23. Whatever the result is, you then add to that the fund value of any pension contracts that you have. So these are your defined contribution schemes. So FSAVCs, AVCs, anything stocks and shares based. If you are at or above currently, according to 2019-2020 tax tables, if you are above £1,055,000 and this year you wanted to retire, you potentially would have a lifetime allowance charge. However, there are lots of different types of planning options that you can do to mitigate or completely reduce this, to mitigate the tax or reduce it to a more appropriate level. The way that the NHS pension scheme recovers the lifetime allowance charge actually can make it very, in terms of cash flow side of things, it might not eat into your annualised income at all, really. I did a case yesterday where somebody had a lifetime allowance charge and the difference was between paying £500 a year less, which you're not really going to notice that much. The NHS pension scheme will satisfy that liability directly with HMRC. So you won't get an invoice, you won't have to do any self-assessment tax returns that you might do with the annual allowance.
Okay.
pay that tax liability. Okay.
Nick, any thoughts?
On the lifetime allowance?
Yeah.
It creates some slightly perverse incentives as a GP, because once you start to reach the lifetime allowance, it's probably worth then reducing the amount of work that you do, and that's the situation that the annual allowance charges have put people in, where the reason that it's attracted some attention in the last 6 months, couple of years, has been that people are cutting back on work to avoid the tax charges. And if you hit 55 and your pension's at or around the lifetime allowance, there's less incentive for you to work as hard, I think.
Okay. So I guess the question that I'm often asked, and I see on all the various forums and on all that kind of stuff, is, should I stay in the NHS pension? Now, I guess I'm going to ask that question to you all, but with the slight caveat that our listeners and our viewers need to know that obviously it needs to be personal information. This is based on your own accounts and that kind of stuff. So we're clearly not going to give you a yes for you as an individual. But yeah, I guess more asking about the themes about what does that mean in terms of, should I stay or should I not stay in the NHS pension? Should we start with Krishan?
The NHS pension scheme, as Rachel has mentioned, offers many benefits. It's not only the pension, you have the Tier 1, Tier 2 health and death benefits. As an overall package, it is a fantastic pension scheme that is available to NHS workers. The difficulties which are currently arising are due to the way it's managed, due to the annual allowance charges and due to the lifetime allowance charges. And as a result, people are choosing to come out of the scheme for various reasons. So my personal view is that if you are able to manage your pension scheme in a way that you don't essentially come and have to pay these annual allowance and lifetime allowance charges, the NHS pension scheme is a very good scheme, and it is unlikely or very difficult to find a scheme or policies that would match something on the open market.
Okay.
I would agree that. I agree that comment. I think that you've got to save for retirement. So you have to take a step back and think, how am I going to provide for myself when I retire and I'm not working anymore? And you will have to save via ISAs, things like that, which is fine. However, you're sat on a scheme which increases at a rate above inflation. For a lot of GP partners, they are receiving benefits that are 1.5% above inflation, because that's the way the dynamising works. Now, another thing that I would add is that the reason why some people are coming out of the scheme to do with these tax charges, it does apply to everybody. So even outside of the NHS pension scheme, you've got people like myself who work into the private sector. We still are subject to this level of taxation. So if you were to say to me, should I contribute to the NHS pension scheme or should I contribute to a stocks and shares pension? The answer would definitely be NHS every single time. However, everybody's situation is unique. So one thing that is very important, you ask yourself the question, how much income do I want to retire on? And you work from there with the help of people like the BMA, financial advisors, and with your accountant.
Cool. I'll go to Nick in a second, but I know Krishan wanted to come back in.
I just wanted to add one other point. On a lot of the Facebook groups at the moment, we see individuals who are very unhappy because of the way the scheme is being processed, and it's causing them a lot of stress, and they're coming out of the scheme as a result. All the members that I speak to, I say to them, please do not do this, because essentially you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I recognise that there are problems, and individuals like myself and Nick and others are working extremely hard to try and resolve these issues. You have to realise that this is a blip in the grand scheme of things. In 2, 3, 4 years' time, hopefully, these issues will be resolved. And individuals like Nick and I are working hard to resolve it. So please, if you are thinking about coming out of the scheme, take some professional advice. There's lots of advice on these groups, but really consider taking some professional advice to make sure that the decision you're making is right for you.
Definitely. So we'll come back to that in a second. But Nick, I wanted to ask you the question because I know you've been doing a lot of work on this. NHS pension, yes or no, kind of thing.
So yes, but I came out for about 6 months this year because of the annual allowance tax charges, and I did that because it's really painful paying that amount of money when you don't expect it.
Yeah.
And I think that comes back to the points we made about what you lose doing that, and what worried me doing that was the loss, the death and service benefits. You know, if I'd dropped dead a month ago, then my wife and my children wouldn't have got anything from the NHS, or wouldn't have got very much from the NHS pension scheme. Whereas I'm 42 now, if I'd dropped dead being in the pension scheme, they then get a survivor's pension. I think the spouse gets it for their whole life, and it's 33% of what your pension would have been at retirement times 2/3. So for me, that would be another 27 years of growth. And that's the bit that you can't buy on the open market. Mm-hmm. My children would have got that until they're 25, they get something like 17%. And those benefits, you know, that worried me coming out. If I've been knocked down by a car, suddenly I've massively financially disadvantaged them. To avoid what set against that would be a relatively small tax charge now. But I did come out, I'm now back in. I think that's the BMA. There's a guy called Tony Goldstone, who I haven't met, but who's done incredible work, as Krishan has, on pensions, and particularly on the annual allowance. And I think he turned out the hokey cokey, where you go out for 6 months and then back in for 6 months to try and minimise the tax charges that you get. And that's not perfect. But I think coming back to the question, my advice to most people would be, certainly if you're not hit by the annual allowance, there is absolutely no way you should be out of the NHS pension scheme. You will not get a better scheme on the open market. And going back to the Facebook groups that Krishan mentioned, my heart slightly sinks in there when I see people saying, well, I'm going to come out and buy property or invest in stocks and shares, or you see some really out there things that are promising ludicrous amounts of growth, and that just puts you at risk. It just puts your pension at risk. And the problem with that is that, as Krishan says, people are doing that not for financial reasons primarily, but because they're sick of having to spend so much time just managing their pension and worrying about it, because the systems that are in place, the whole NHS pension system, from when the money leaves your pocket or your employer, that whole system is a colossal mess, and people just get sick of it and leave it for emotional reasons, quite understandably.
Cool. So for those that are thinking of leaving the NHS pension scheme, forestry is a really great way of spending your money and income and that kind of stuff. And if you want, I've got some trees out the back that people are welcome to invest in. More than happy for you to do that. And I'll send you the link for the payment details. However, we've talked about the challenges that people have had in terms of processing things. So we've talked about the annual allowance, the LTA and all that kind of stuff. The elephant in the room sometimes is capita and the processing of payments, which has particularly hit locums, in particular, salary doctors and even partners. So, you know, one of the things I know that Nick and Krishan have spent a load of time trying to do is just tackle this beast that is trying to find out how much you've actually stuck in to the NHS pension. We don't have time to go through that in complete detail, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to give you guys another episode that goes into that a lot more detail later down the line. But just in brief, I'd really like an idea from you guys. What do people need to do just to figure out what on earth they have paid into the scheme? Just give them some info.
I'll come in. I think the slightly flippant answer is, unless you're really close to retirement, don't worry about it.
Exactly.
There's absolutely no reason. And also, the amount you've paid into the pension is, by and large, completely irrelevant. Unless you've overpaid and they owe you some money back, or unless you owe them some money, don't worry about it. It's a defined benefit scheme. What matters is your annual earnings in the NHS. And those aren't going to change because capital lose some money. So unless you're coming up to retirement, don't worry about it. There are people working about it. Krishan's been doing it a lot longer than I have, who are working to try and get the system sorted out. So I think part of the problem of doing what we do and of trying to fix this system is it creates awareness of just how broken it is. And that, again, drives people out of the scheme for emotional reasons. But the kind of one message would be, unless you're coming out to retirement, do nothing, and it'll get there at some point.
And Krishan?
So Capita took over the system in 2015, and prior to Capita taking over, NHS England were running the pension scheme. And it's become quite evident that different areas of England were doing remarkably different things. And even Wales, which is part of the England and Welsh scheme, were doing things differently again. So there were problems before. All that has happened is that since Capita have come along, number one, they've highlighted those concerns, but then they made it worse. Now, with PwC, for example, they're the management consultants that are working with Capita and NHS England to help resolve these issues. Now, I agree with Nick entirely. My view is that they're in a process of trying to fix this. And individuals like Nick, myself, are holding them to account to ensure that they get to a point where people's records are correct and people can rely that the pension that they will receive is correct. So I agree with Nick entirely that if you're coming up to retirement, then you need to put some pressure on them to make sure that your records are correct. If you're not coming up to retirement anytime soon, then it should be relatively resolved by the time you get that. My only point is that I'd like to add is to make sure that you keep records of everything. Make sure that you keep records of how much your pensionable pay is and how much your contributions are. Your pension is based on your pensionable pay, not your contributions. And you must make sure that these records are clear, and any correspondence you have with these individuals, you keep a copy of. Because if in the future your record comes up and it's incorrect, you need to be able to prove how it is incorrect and why.
Can I just add something to this conversation? There were many years ago that when we first embarked upon these annual allowance calculations, I think it was Ireland and Scotland that were missing about 4 or 5 years of pension records, and we couldn't get to the bottom of our clients' annual allowance charges because of it. I work with pensionable pay records. I work to try and keep these as up to date and as accurate as possible, and there's definitely an issue there in the system. So this also has a knock-on effect with planning. When people are making decisions about the future, we can be working on data and we could be driven by data that is incorrect. And that's what I'm seeing and this is the fallout from these issues with capita.
Okay, Nick?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the only thing to kind of add there is that as Rachel says, it does affect your ability to financially plan for your future. Although I'm saying do nothing now to get sorted out, that is a problem in terms of the lifetime allowance, and obviously in terms of the annual allowance, you need to think about it now. I think going back to the problems with record keeping, although I'm saying do nothing now, there is a problem if you are coming out to retirement. You know, we know from some of the casework we've done, there are people who have had information given to them by PCSE and by NHS pensions, which is just wrong, going back 30 or so years. And I've got people who've had a subject access request come back, they've gone through that. PwC have then looked in detail at their cases and still haven't been able to produce accurate information. We've only found that out because the individual doctor has gone back through 20 or 30 years of month-by-month payslips checking them. And one thing that we do need to sort out with PCSE and with NHS England is how that work gets funded. I think one of the main problem for me with PCSE at the moment is that they've created a system where I think there are probably thousands or tens of thousands of doctors whose information isn't accurate, and where the system has no way of getting that information accurate. And there needs to be a way of if you're going to ask the doctors to do that work themselves, which effectively is what I think is being asked of them at the moment, that work needs to be paid for by NHS England or by the people who've made the mistake. And that, I think, is the big drive of the work that I'm doing at the moment, certainly. I don't know if you'd agree with that, Krishan.
Can I add one other point, if I may?
Yeah, sure.
So the TRS is what's called the Total Rewards Statement, and that is released normally annually. So we negotiate, well, the BMA, my role there, negotiates that it's done at the moment biannually, so it's done in August and December. Now, I don't have the date off the top of my head at the moment, but it's normally the last week of August that TRS will be updated. I would ask that all members have a look, log on, see what state their pension is currently in. If records are missing or they're incorrect, etc., try and get in contact and get them up to date as soon as possible, because the next update will be in the first week of December. It's not either the first week or the second week. Last year it was on the 9th of December, but it kind of is in that time period, so that you can start getting your record in place. And I think this is a really important first step. There are some caveats to that. Number one, if, for example, you have added years, your TRS will be blank. So there's no reason to panic, but it's very difficult to get that data. And if your TRS is blank as a result of that, you will need to write to NHS Pensions. So this year I've asked when the TRS is updated, and if it is blank, it will give you a reason or reasons why your TRS is blank. I haven't seen any screenshots of that as of yet, but hopefully that will be there. So for example, on my record, I've got added years. So hopefully when my TRS comes up this year, it will say it's not available because I have added years. But we'll have to wait and see.
Divorce is another one, isn't it, Krishan? Cheerfully. We started on death, but now we've gone to divorce. But I think if you've had a CETV and they've got divorced, I think that's another reason TRS doesn't automatically update.
Yeah.
Pension sharing order.
Okay. So that is so much information that my head, I think, is going to explode. Hopefully our listeners and our viewers haven't done so. But there's really useful information there. So we've kind of, just in summary, we've covered what the pension scheme is, definitely some of the more complicated terms around it. We've covered about whether you should or shouldn't stay into the NHS pension scheme. It sounds like the resounding answer is yes, but keep an eye on your data, because that's the thing that's going to matter the most. And when it comes to the data, we've got PSCE, a capita, and hopefully that situation will be resolved. I know that Nick and Krishan and others are working tirelessly to try and sort this out for people. What I would say is that if you want to help support them, that they would be more than happy, I'm pretty sure, for further information in a sensible format. So I know General Practice Survival has methods of collecting that, and all the links for those kind of methods of communication stuff I'll put in the show notes so people can access them. And if you've got any questions, obviously these groups like GP Survival and others are around to try and capture some of that data. And clearly the BMA as well, you know, our union are here to try and help us and support us, and they're just working tirelessly to try and sort out this absolute chaotic mess that is pensions. I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us today. I know it's a very meaty, complicated topic, and you've definitely helped demystify some of it, for me at least, at the very end. And, you know, that's good. Okay. I guess I'd like to just give you just a quick 30 seconds. So anything else you want to capture before we sign off? So if we start with Rachel.
Yeah, there was some questions that I think your viewers had asked, and one of them was about 50-50 and what annual salary is worth doing at. Well, we've heard recently that complete flexibility might come in from next year. One of the big questions on everybody's minds next year will be, what is the optimum level of pension contribution? That is going to be very much dependent upon outcomes. So everybody's driver needs to be outcome based. And then just to take a step back to what we were talking about before, in terms of due diligence, make sure that you start to gather your tax returns, so 16, 17, 17, 18 tax returns. Order a copy of your membership statement, really very, very useful. And they can be requested directly from NHS Pensions. And then just try and do this general sort of housekeeping exercise to keep on top of all your pension records and up to date as possible.
Perfect. Nick?
Yeah, I think going along with that, going back to annual allowances, as Rachel has, I'd go along with that. In some ways, you're shooting in the dark, but if you've been hit by an annual allowance tax charge, as Rachel says, get all the information you can from NHS Pensions and try and predict or guess what your income will be for the current year, and look at how you can reduce that accordingly. So if you're a partner, it might mean doing what I did and coming in and out for a spell. If you do different jobs, you can actually pension some income and not others. I think you can only do it in blocks. So if you do salaried and locum work, you can pension, for instance, the salaried work but not the locum work. And if you are hit by an annual allowance tax charge, that's a sensible thing to do. But I think it's trying to make the best of the current situation and hoping that the work that BMA have done to get the annual allowance taper, the annual allowance and the taper on the agenda to get it changed, wait for that to come to fruition, I think.
Cool. And Krishan?
Firstly, thank you, Hussein, for organising this webinar. What I'd like to say to members is that I recognise that for many that they do not understand the pension scheme. I recognise that many find this remarkably stressful and difficult. And I think the thing I would like to focus on, number one, the NHS pension scheme is still a great opportunity for NHS workers. Try and keep hold of your records. And if you do get stuck, there are people like Nick and myself out there who are willing to help. And if you need some financial advice, get a good pension expert who knows what they're doing to help you, support you. I completely recognise that this can be a complete minefield. It can be a new language to some people. But it really is something to try and get your head around. Try and do it in small chunks, and you will come out the other side in a better position.
Cool. Thank you. So again, guys, thank you for joining us. As I said, I found this really useful, and I hope our EGP learners have done so as well. I'll put all the links that people have mentioned about, so how to access the NHS pensions, the kind of allowance stuff and all that kind of thing. And if okay with our speakers, you know, the contact details, if you need to contact them and stuff, in the show notes. So have a look down there. And as always, guys, we're here to try and help save you and your patients time by taking hands in your primary care and learning. Catch you guys in the next episode, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey GP learners, I hope you found that episode useful. As always, if you've got any questions, make sure you contact me. More than happy to try and answer things. And if you've got any questions for our guests as well, more than happy to try and pass those on for you. Make sure you click subscribe to get all of our content first and foremost. And please, please, please leave a review. Really appreciate it. As always, we're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and all the podcasting platforms. And EGP Learning is here to help save you and your patients time by tech enhancing your primary care and learning. Catch you in the next episode.